Today, I am going to talk to you about the academic transition from high school to college. And I have worked on a college campus for over 20 years, and I'm currently oversee a learning center and I'm an academic coach, and I see students make the same mistakes over and over again. So in this video, we're going to talk about each of those mistakes, and at the very end of the video, I'm going to give you my top tip to be successful in college. The first mistake I see students make consistently is they have poor time management. And specifically, they underestimate how many hours a week they need to be doing academic work. And here's what I know, is that your average high school senior studies 6 or fewer hours a week. When you look at college nationally, students are putting about 14 hours a week. At my university, I know students that are getting A's and B's are doing somewhere between 20 to 30 hours of academic work per week. And so if you take 15 credits, which is a normal workload, so 15 hours a week plus that 20 to 30 hours a week, all of a sudden you're studying 40, 45 hours a week of academic work. That is okay, that's doable, that's a normal work week, but it's a full-time job. And you have students who are going from 6 or fewer hours a week. And honestly, most of the college students that I talk to who are coming in and are smart students tell me, Eric, I didn't study at all in high school. High school was easy for me. And then they get to college and they're supposed to be jumping up to 20 to 30 hours. So what you need to do, first step, is get control of your time management. And so I need you to build a study schedule. And that's the big thing, is you have a weekly study schedule. And you have to plan out the time when you're going to do your work. There's something called the planning fallacy. And this is a very common psychological trap that many of us fall into. And it's this idea that, okay, I have this thing that I need to do. I will stick it on my to-do list, and I will do it later when I have more time. The trap is you never have more time. And if you don't plan and if you don't build the time to do it, you will end up doing other things during that time. You'll be working on other people's priorities, or you'll be doing things that really don't matter and are just taking up time. And that's a big thing, because in high school, if you look back at high school, first of all, you had a very regimented schedule. It was thing after thing after thing after thing after thing. It was very structured, and you did the same things every single day. And on top of that, you had parents and teachers and coaches keeping you on track and making sure that you were doing what you're supposed to be doing. And so what happened is, in high school, you had no choice. You got up and you did the thing, right? But because you were doing the thing consistently every day, it became a routine. And when it becomes a routine, it becomes a habit. And when it becomes a habit, the whole definition of a habit is that it is automated behavior. You do it automatically, which means it takes less mental energy. And then all of a sudden you go to college and you lose that routine, because you're gonna have maybe 2 or 3 classes a day. And in between those classes, you're gonna have lots of open time. You might have a day where you have no classes or only 1 class. And so students lose that routine and they go to class and they take notes because they're good students. But in between and all that open space, they're hanging out, they're going to the gym, they're sleeping, they're doing whatever else. And then you try to study in the evenings like you did in high school. I'm gonna study at night. Well, guess what happens at night in college? People get together and they have fun, right? And so you end up going out and you end up having fun. And then you start falling behind on your academics, and that's where it starts to get really stressful. So what you need to do, this is a weird trick, is I need your college schedule to look like your high school schedule. I need you to identify a work day and treat it like work. You get up, you go to class, and in between classes, you study, right? And you go to the library, you go somewhere, don't go back to your room, and you study. And you put in your work day, and at the end of the work day, that's when you go back to your room, and that's when you have fun, that's when you go to the gym, that's when you do whatever. Make it look like your high school schedule. And what I like to teach students is you start off with a weekly schedule, and what you're going to do is you're going to put in your fixed events first. So fixed events are things that you do every single week. Those are classes, right? That's a job. Those are if you have a club that you're involved in. You put in the big things. Those are the big chunks, the things that you do every single week. And now you have your base default schedule, I like to call it. Now we need to improve it. So the first thing you do is you need to make sure that you're not going to get burnt out and overwhelmed, because that's another problem in college. And to avoid burnout, you need a few things. You need to take care of your basic wellness. I need to see consistent sleep. a sleep schedule, and that's the hardest thing for many college students. I need to see healthy food. I need to see some form of exercise. And yes, I want to see friends. I want to see social stuff on that. And so those are the big four. So you have your fixed events, and then you're going to plug in the big four. When do you go to bed at night? When are you eating? When are you exercising? And yes, put in when you're being social. You plug in the big four. Now you look at your calendar and you see, here's the rest of the time that I have available. That's when you do your work, right? And we know it's somewhere between 20 to 30 hours of work. So I want you to block 20 to 30 hours. You block that time. And you don't do just big, huge blocks. You do a 1 hour block at a time, right? And so you build that schedule until you have a weekly schedule where your entire week is planned out, all right? Then we do what's called a weekly review. So you're gonna think about your week before it happens. You're gonna sit down when you're calm, cool, and collected. You're going to go ahead and look at your to-do list. You're gonna look at all your syllabi. You're gonna look at what you have to get done that week. And then you're gonna take things off that to-do list and you're gonna stick them on your calendar. That's why I said keep hour blocks, because I want you to be able to put 1 or 2 things in an hour, period. If you try to put too much stuff in there, you're gonna get overwhelmed. And so you put 1 or 2 things that you're gonna do in each one of those blocks that you set aside to do work. And you're now using your weekly schedule to manage your to-do list. And that is one of the more well-researched things. That's one of the best ways to be productive, is not to just let yourself figure it out on the fly, which is what most people do. They go to that default schedule where they just go to class, and then in between class, they just kind of figure out what they're gonna do at that time. No, I want you to live a life of design. I want you to plan ahead. And so you go ahead and go, okay, I'm gonna go to class, and in between class, I'm gonna go to the library and I'm going to study this specific thing. I'm going to find research articles for this paper. You know exactly what you're going to do, and you build out your entire week like that. And the other thing that happens is once you do this, your week is filled with your top priorities for that week. And this sounds intimidating and it sounds super structured, and it is super structured, but it's actually very flexible, because what will happen is, like, you're gonna say, okay, at 10 o'clock, I need to find those research articles at the library. But then something comes up, life happens, you don't feel well, something happens, so you don't do it. What you're going to do is you're gonna go back to your schedule and you'll say, okay, I didn't do this and this today. And you're going to pick them up and you're gonna move them to one of the other slots. And that's what you're constantly doing, is you're picking things up and you're moving them back onto your calendar so you know when to do them. And what lots of overwhelmed students do is they say, oh, I didn't do this thing. I will do it later when I have more time. That's the planning fallacy. And then you never have more time. And all those small things that you picked up and you put off, they start to accumulate. And once they start to accumulate, then it starts to become stressful and you start falling behind, and that's the beginning of the downward spiral. And I know when the downward spiral is happening, because at the beginning of the academic year, all the college students look like supermodels, right? Everyone looks great. Everyone is happy. Everyone is smiling. By mid-semester, when students are starting to spiral down, students will be in my office and they will straight up stink. They won't smell good, right? Their hair will be all mussed up and it'll look like they've been camping outside. They have twigs in their hair. They have big bags under their eyes, right? They're a mess, and it's because they're getting stuck in that cycle. And it's this up-down cycling that I see that really affects college students, is that you will fall behind, and to catch up, you start to cram, you start to pull all-nighters, and you go busy, 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 busy. You're working really hard, and then because you're working so hard, you crash. And when you crash, you're doing nothing because you're exhausted. And because you're exhausted, all that stuff starts to accumulate again, and so you have to repeat the cycle. Busy, 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 crash. Busy, 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 crash. Busy, 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 crash. That is horrible for your mental health. That is horrible for your physical health, and it is horrible for your learning. And college shouldn't be miserable, but I see so many students who are miserable because they can't control their time. They don't know how to manage their time. They don't know how to prioritize. They don't know how to build a weekly schedule. So the goal is calm, focused, consistent productivity. The second mistake that I see students make is that they don't study correctly. And before we get into how to study correctly, we need to understand neuroplasticity. And to understand neuroplasticity, let's talk about Hebb's law. Hebb's law says that neurons that fire together wire together. So the first time you think about something as you're learning, there's a certain sequence of neurons that fire and there's a loose neural connection. Now, you do that same thing over and over and over again, and that loose neural connection will become a dense neural network. And once it's a dense neural network, you now have a long-term memory. So you've learned something, or maybe you've learned a jump shot, right? And this was 1949 when Hebb started teaching this and we learned about this. And the teachers back at that time took the wrong messages. They said, oh, repetition, this is how you learn. And so you reread, you rewrite, right? You could think about those images of kids on the blackboards just rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. And yes, that does work, right? The science is there, neurons that fire together, wire together. But the issue is there's two major things. One is that it is too slow, and college is fast. When I was in college, I was a first-year student, first generation student, and I used to think, oh, a semester is a half a year. A semester is not half a year. A semester is 16 weeks. You have 16 weeks for a semester, and you usually have 3 weeks between exams. College moves very fast. You have to learn quickly, and repetition studying is too slow. The other thing is that it is too passive. It's way too passive. You're just rereading and rereading, and you're doing what I call feel-good studying. Because as you reread and reread, you're like, I know this. But what's happening is you're dumping information into your short-term memory. It's in your short-term memory. So when you go to the exam, all of a sudden you try to pull the information out, and you're like, oh, I recognize that. But you just can't pull it out of your head, right? That's the feel-good studying. And I always know when I have a repetition studier in my office because they're able to tell me things like, Eric, I recognize the material and they can show me where it is. They're like, it was here in my notes in the top left-hand corner. It was in the book under this diagram. They know where the information is, but they actually don't know the information. They weren't able to recall it. That's a sure sign that you're a repetition studier. So how do you get past this? You do what's called memory retrieval, or what's called the testing effect. And the testing effect is that you need to study in the exact way that you're going to be tested, which means no notes, no study guide, no materials in front of you, just you. You need to be able to pull it from memory. That's how you study in college, is I need you to build some sort of study guide, and I will go more in depth in other videos, but you will build a study guide and you organize the information and you have everything that you need to study. And then I need you to put that study guide away, and then you need to be able to pull it out from memory. You go to a whiteboard and you write it out from memory. You get one of your friends and you explain it out loud and you teach it to them without your notes in front of you. And when you're pulling things from memory, what will quickly happen is that you'll recognize where your knowledge gaps are. You're like, ooh, I actually don't understand this, or I keep forgetting this one thing. And that's awesome, because that's the most important and most difficult part about studying, is how do you know what you don't know? Because when you're doing repetition studying, what ends up happening is you tend to study things that you already know. You study things that you already know, but you're not identifying your knowledge gaps. What you should be doing is quickly finding what those gaps are and then studying those gaps. And then you add that information to stuff that you know. So how do you know what you don't know? You get up on a whiteboard, you pull it from memory, you find out where you make mistakes. You teach a friend, and your friend asks you a question and you don't know the answer. Awesome, found another information gap, right? And you keep finding these gaps, and then you find the information and you pull it into your study guide until you have a comprehensive document that has everything that you need to know for that upcoming exam. That's what it looks like. That's how you study in college. So you need to put in the time, and we know that's somewhere between 20 to 30 hours outside of class, and you need to be studying correctly. You need to be using the testing effect. And if you could put those things together, you're going to do well in college. The third mistake that I see is students have poor stress management. And the stress comes from not doing the first two things. Students have poor time management, and so they're not studying enough to go into an exam. And so they go into the exam and they fail. and they don't understand why they're failing because they're doing the same things they did in high school, and they were great students in high school. They go to class, they take notes, they go to class, they take notes, and they study the week before the exam. And then they fail the exam, and now stress is there. And those students say to themselves, okay, well, I'm just gonna study harder. And so they do study harder, but they do the exact same wrong techniques. They do the repetition studying, and they're still not studying enough. And then they fail the second exam. And now that student is panicked, and they're panicked, and real stress comes in, and stress affects the way you learn. And I need you to understand this. So the stress response, fight, flight, freeze. That's something you probably heard since elementary school, but it has huge implications for college because this is a primitive response meant to deal with physical danger, right? I am going to fight that thing over there, or I'm going to run away from it. And if I can't fight it and I can't run away from it, then I freeze. I'm a deer in the headlights. That is a normal physiological response to stress. And ideally, you get away from that danger and your body resets itself. It gets rid of all those stress hormones. But what happens for a modern person is we never get away from the danger because the danger is no longer physical, hopefully. The danger is exams and email and relationships and whatever, right? These are common, normal stressors for a modern person, and we never escape it. And so we go into what's called survival mode. And when you get into survival mode, what happens is your prefrontal cortex, so this is the portion of your brain that has all your executive functions. This is the portion of your brain where you think. It's your critical thinking portion of your brain. Is it begins to become de-skilled. It starts to go offline. And the limbic system, which is the emotional portion of your brain. It's the part of your brain that scans for sensory information and has the emotional centers of your brain starts to take over. And so you become more emotional and you become less logical, right? Which is not great when you're trying to study. And what's happening is you have two stress hormones. The first one is adrenaline. And when adrenaline is released, that is great if you're in a situation where you need to fight or run. But it's not so helpful when you're trying to sit down and study, because if you're constantly triggering fight or flight and releasing adrenaline, that turns into anxiety. And so now you're anxious and you are jittery and you just can't focus. The other hormone is very interesting, and it's called cortisol. And when cortisol is released, it's what causes brain fog. It makes it hard to think. It actually stops you from retrieving memory and makes it difficult to form new memories. Why would we have a hormone that makes it hard to think? Well, at least the theory is that you don't want to overthink the saber-toothed tiger. You see the tiger, you want to get out of there, right? And so what happens is you get stuck in this brain fog, and of course your prefrontal cortex doesn't just like turn off, but you're in this de-skilled state where you're more emotional and you have less willpower, and so you're more likely to give into urges. You start losing sight of your long-term goals and you start focusing on your immediate surroundings instead, right? And so you start to veer off course. And when you veer off course, you're not getting things done and things begin to pile up, and all of a sudden you're in a spot where you need to cram. And then you see that up-down cycling I talked about before, where students are busy, 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 and they crash, busy, 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 crash, busy, 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 crash. That's what happens. And so we need to have time management to take care of that, and then we need to study correctly. And when you're dealing with stress, there's two ways to go about it: top-down processing and bottom-up processing, and you need both. Top-down processing is you're going to use your brain. You're going to think about strategies, you're going to build study schedules, you're going to use your brain to think your way through the situation and come up with a plan. Now, the problem with that is that you are losing your executive functions. Your executive functions are your ability to plan, your ability to organize, your ability to get initiated on things, to start things, your ability to monitor whether you're doing what you need to be doing or not, your ability to control your emotions, right? To control your impulses. Those are all executive functions, and you're losing that when you become stressed, which is why it's useful to come talk to an academic coach, to go to a counselor, to work with someone else who's not in the same situation who can help you figure out a plan. You may have experienced this, or you may have seen a friend right? Who's just overwhelmed and stressed and they're in survival mode, and you watch them make bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. Well, it's because they're in survival mode. So if you find yourself in that brain fog and you can't figure things out, you need to ask for help. That's the first step, right? Find someone who can help you figure things out and to make a plan. Use that cognitive resources, use the prefrontal cortex, use your critical thinking, and you develop a plan to get yourself out of this. That's one part of the puzzle. The second part of the puzzle is bottom-up processing, and you need to address that limbic system, that emotional center that is getting overwhelmed, right? And it's so overwhelmed that it's sending such strong messages that you're not able to think straight. Have you ever been in a car and you lowered the music so you could see better, right? It's the same thing. It's like you have so much sensory information coming in that it's hard to think straight, so you've got to calm it down. And we calm it down by taking care of our body, because the stress response is a normal physiological response to stress. It's a normal physiological response. And so to address it, we have to address it with our physiology. I need to make sure that you are taking care of yourself. Basic wellness. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you exercising? Are you eating healthy food? Are you hanging out with friends and having social connection in your life? If you're doing that, you are going to be happier. You're going to be able to take care of that limbic system. And here's the thing, that's basic wellness, especially sleep, exercise, and food. I need that in your life, right? Sleep, exercise, and food. Because if you don't do that, you're not taking care of your brain. Yes, it's body health, but it turns out that your brain is inside your body. And your brain is doing hard things in college and you need to take care of it, right? And again, I could see when students aren't doing this as they start to spiral down, because what is the first thing that we do when we are stressed and we're behind? Is you stop sleeping, right? You stop sleeping and you start working later at night. And college students famously pull those all-nighters. And then when you're pulling those all-nighters, what do? You're tired and you're not focused and you don't have willpower, and so you eat nothing but crappy food, right? And so you're eating nothing but crappy food, you're not sleeping, and then the next day, do you go exercise and take care of yourself? No, you're exhausted, and so you don't do any of that. And that's when you start to spiral down. And so we need to get our stress strategies in place. You know that college is going to be stressful, so how are you going to deal with the stress? You need to use top-down and bottom-up processing and come up with a plan, and you have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of your brain. And if you're able to do that, you're going to be able to work harder and get things done. So it's about not burning out. It's about having a strategy and learn how to take care of yourself. This leads us to the last big mistake that I see. And you have that false narrative that we talked about. And eventually you have the wrong mindset. And mindsets are extremely important. So let's start with the research of Bandura. And Bandura talks about self-efficacy. And basically you could think of self-efficacy similar to self-confidence. Self-efficacy means that you believe that you will be successful. You believe that you have some sort of control over your environment. You believe that you can do the task that's in front of you. You believe you could be successful in college. And self-efficacy is based on your past experiences. And so you think about what you did in high school and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna do well in college. Or better yet, you do well in college and you do well in that one exam, and so now you know you could do it in the future. That is self-efficacy. And self-efficacy research has shown us that what you believe about your performance, about your future, has a huge impact. Students who have more self-efficacy are more likely to be successful. If you have low self-efficacy, if you don't believe you could do it, guess what? You can't do it. It becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So this leads us to the idea of mindsets. And this is the research of Carol Dweck. And Dweck talks about growth versus fixed mindsets. And if you have a growth mindset, you see failure as an opportunity to learn. Failure is an opportunity to learn and grow. That's how you perceive it. If you have a fixed mindset, you see failure as a limit of your abilities. And there's a big difference there, because when you see failure as an opportunity to grow, it's just part of the growing learning process, right? You're like, oh, I failed. I got to figure this out. I'm going to keep on trying. And if you see failure as a limit of your abilities, meaning that you're intelligent is fixed fixed mindset, like you can't become more intelligent, you don't have what it takes, what happens is it affects your behavior. Just like in self-efficacy, you get to the point where you don't try. And that's it. In the growth mindset, students, when they experience failure, keep trying. Students that have a fixed mindset will stop trying. And that stop trying means they will fail. And this research of mindsets is very similar to the research that's on optimism and pessimism. So an optimistic person will see things and they'll come across a problem and they'll see it as temporary and specific, right? And a pessimistic person is going to see something as permanent and pervasive. Like it's a permanent thing, you can't get away from it. Pervasive, you can't escape it. And those are connected to growth and fixed mindsets. And so I'll give you an example. So I am an academic coach, and so I often see students after they fail an exam, which means I often see students that have failed the same exam. And so one week I have a student come in and she says, okay, Eric, I failed my philosophy exam. And we start talking through it. I'm like, okay, tell me what happened. And she says, okay, we were given 4 different philosophers. I ran out of time. I didn't study the 4th philosopher. And it turns out Aristotle's a big deal, right? That's exactly what she said. Aristotle's a big deal. And it's like seared in my brain because it's so funny, all right? But that was a very optimistic growth mindset response. She gave me a specific reason. I didn't study all of the philosophers, right? She identified that specific reason and she recognized it was temporary, because the next thing that she said is, the next exam, I'm going to manage my time better and I will study all the philosophers. And so we worked on time management, and that's exactly what she did. And she did fine on our next exam. So, different situation. Same week, different student comes in. And he comes in and he says, Eric, I failed my philosophy exam. I'm like, okay, tell me what happened. And then he started tearing up and he said, Eric, I don't know what happened. And his second words out of his mouth were, I don't know if I belong here, right? And that is a permanent, pervasive statement. He didn't look for new solutions. He was just thinking to himself, I failed. That means I'm not smart enough to be in college. So for students, I need you to look for that. I need you to look for permanent, pervasive, right? If you're a parent watching this video, I need you to look for those statements too. If a student is saying something that's permanent and pervasive, like they can't change it and that no matter what happens, they can't do it, and so they'll quit, right? That's what's gonna happen, is we need to reframe that as temporary and specific, just like the first student. And so what I did is I talked to the second student and we found reasons. He was sick, and so he didn't study enough, right? And you were able to build that narrative back up, because that's the important part, is that you need to have the right mindset. And you could do this by using the ABCDE model, right? And this model talks about like there's some sort of adversity, that's the A, right? And then you have the B is the belief, and then you have the C is the consequence. And what happens is you have the adversity and you jump straight to the consequence. So the adversity is I failed the exam, and the consequence is I'm not smart enough to be in college. And what you need to do is to train yourself that there's a belief underneath that, and you have to look at that belief. That belief is I do not belong in college because I'm not smart enough. And then that leads us to D, disputation, is you gotta challenge that junk. How would your parents defend you? How would your best friend defend you? They would say, listen, you failed that exam because you didn't study enough, because you were sick, because whatever. They would give you reasons. But when it's ourselves, we are more likely to just be hard on ourselves and to beat ourselves up and to get into this like guilt and shame spiral, which does not help you because it leads you to quit, right? And college is about not quitting, because college is freaking hard and you gotta keep pushing through it. So you need to pay attention to that mindset. And so you have that adversity, you have the consequence, and you have to identify the belief, and then you have D, you dispute that belief. And once you dispute that belief and you start having the inner dialogue where you're defending yourself, it leads to the E, which is it gives you more energy to keep moving forward. So you have to look at this and you have to pay attention to your mindset. You have to pay attention to your inner dialogue, because it's about self-efficacy. If you don't believe that you're going to be successful in college, you're not going to be successful. So you have to build your mental resilience. And building mental resilience just doesn't happen. It's a skill. You have to train yourself to do it. You have to use that ABCDE model. You have to be thinking about what's happening and reframing those pessimistic thoughts as optimistic thoughts. You have to feed that growth mindset. And if you do that, you will do well in college. At the beginning of the video, I promised that I'd give you my top tip to be successful in college at the end. And here we are. The top tip to be successful in college is it's not about how to be successful in college. It's about who can help you be successful. No one does it by themselves. And there's some sort of weird thing, and I see it in college students all the time, is they get to college and they think, I'm in college now. I need to do this by myself. I need to prove to myself that I have what it takes. And that is not true. No one does that. The best students in college are in the tutoring center, not the worst students. The best students are the ones who are talking to their faculty during office hours, right? You need to do things. You need to find the people who are going to help you. So it's not about yourself. It's not about how to be successful, and I need to figure out how to do it myself. It's about who can help you be successful, and you collect those people and you build your network of support. So let's talk about the broaden and build theory by Barbara Fredrickson. And this theory says that positive experiences leads to upward spirals. So this entire video, I've been talking about downward spiral, downward spiral, downward spiral, and it's probably freaking you out. Well, here's how you spin it back up, is that you go ask for help and you will have a positive experience. You come in and see me as an academic coach and I help you and I teach you things and you have a positive experience. And because you had a positive experience with me, you are more likely to seek out help from someone else. And so you go talk to your professor and you have another positive experience. And then you have another experience because you are starting to talk to more people. You're talking to your hall director, you're talking to your RAs. Whenever you have something that is stressing you out, you are doing something about that stress by talking to someone at the university. And what will happen is that people will help you and people will teach you things. And because you're having positive experiences and reaching out for help, you're learning new things and you're becoming stronger and you're becoming better. You're becoming adapted to the university, and the university will begin to shrink. It'll begin to feel smaller. It'll begin to feel like your high school where you know who you need to go talk to and you know you have this community of support. And so that's what happens, is those positive experiences broaden your horizons. You're more likely to seek out more help and you're going to learn new skills. And once you learn those new skills and you apply those skills, you have more positive experiences because you're doing better in your classes, right? College is fun and you start to have that upward spiral. But it all starts with this. Who are your people? Where's your community? You need to find friends, yeah. But you need to find friends who have the same goals as you. People that are gonna help you stay on track, that aren't gonna make you feel guilty about studying. You need to find faculty and you need to find staff. You need to find the professionals on campus that are gonna support you. And once you have that community support, things will get easier. It's not about how to be successful in college. It's about who can help you be successful.